Top Med Talk.
Nick Majerison here. Welcome to Top Med Talk. This piece is taken from the Perioperative Medicine Shared Interest Group's 2018 annual conference, Measuring, Managing and Minimising Risk, which was held in association with the Australian and New Zealand Society of Geriatric Medicine and the Internal Medicine Society of Australia and New Zealand. Don't forget to check out the show notes on topmedtalk.com for more details. Have a listen.
Perioperative medicine is a team sport. The first speaker is Don Campbell, who's Professor of Medicine at Monash University. He works there as a general physician as well as regularly at Alice Springs Hospital. He was President of the Internal Medicine Society of Australia and New Zealand about 4 or 5 years ago. And he tells me that he's still not sure what he wants to do when he grows up. So, Don.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come along to the SIG meeting that ANZCA hosts for perioperative medicine. I don't quite know what you're going to make of my talk. I guessed right that you would have some speakers who really knew their topic and the particulars, and so I thought, well, I'll stay general and strategic and see where we land. You'll either think, gee, that was an interesting talk, or that guy's crazy, or I wonder what he was on about, and he may or may not be crazy. All right, so the moonshot. Kennedy in May 1961 made this statement, that the nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, gave it a time frame, gave the big objective, but more particularly the last line, returning him safely to Earth. And I've had people point out that if you can put one man on the moon, why not the lot? And why did he bother bringing them back? I thought that was a bit uncharitable, but what the hell? So the moonshot for health here is early out of hospital management. And the statement might be, we're going to discharge post-operative patients to their homes and manage them safely. The question is whether this is more or less complex than the moonshot. And I want to distinguish between complicated and complex. This diagram is derived from the work of a guy called David Snowden. If anyone heard of Dave Snowden? A couple of you have, okay. Crazy Welshman with a great dream. I'm being uncharitable, but as a sign of affection. And he's got an organisation which he calls Cynefin, Cynefin, which he tells me is Welsh for something. So Ruth might be able to tell us what it's Welsh for. But the point being, to the right side of the vertical is the known or knowable part of the world. Stuff is either simple, and the strategy used is sense, categorise, respond. Complicated, sense, analyse, respond, and that side of that line has served medicine incredibly well. That's how we've grown specialties. Bottom left-hand corner, ED, ICU some of the time. Don't overanalyse it, do something. Act, sense, respond. And up there in the top left-hand corner is the zone of complexity, which is where we've landed as a consequence of our success on the right-hand side of the line, where it's what we should have done is blindingly obvious in retrospect. And the strategy that you use is to probe the system, see what it does, sense it and respond. So probe, sense, respond. I'm going to argue that that's something we've got to take into consideration as we go on this little chat. Okay, so the elephant in the room, if you like, we've touched on it. You've seen this diagram of the acquisition of comorbidities as a function of ageing. Slightly scary. This one from the Productivity Commission in Australia. This is the annual percentage growth rate for categories of age across the years here, and the scary bit is the first peak to 75 and the second peak to 85, and it's PLUs, people like us, people like me, where the only alternative is dying early. So I'm being slightly flippant to try and keep death at bay. But what we argue, and this is cruel, I saw this in a shop window in Paran, And I had to take a picture of it as a model, and I thought I was looking at myself. It's disgusting. And then I thought, well, it's not that bad. At least he's got vastus medialis. Anyway. But what we really want, and that's my son and my father-in-law, he's 90, sitting out the front of his house. And yesterday he walked from his house to my house, about 2 miles, mowed my lawns, and then walked home. He can't do the pull on the internal combustion mower anymore, so I had to get him an electric one. And as I said to my wife, a good son-in-law will do that. So, in terms of the systems of care that we live in, this is Three Horizons. This is a guy called Peter Jones from about redesigning healthcare. He's a Canadian from Toronto. So Horizon 1, the world we left behind us that gave comfort to people like me. Horizon 2, frankly, where we are now, we're up to our neck in change, and we've got no idea what the hell is going on. Look at my health record. Horizon 3, the promised land, within view but beyond reach, and the timeframes for this strategic innovation. Keeping the show on the road in Horizon 1, keeping it going a little longer. Horizon 2, addressing competencies and the tensions in the space, and that's what we're talking about today. It's why we've got an SIG in perioperative medicine. Why does an anaesthetist need to talk to a physician? I mean, it's beyond me. And why would a surgeon talk to either of us? Oh. So being a bit rude, but trying to just get a bit of a reaction. And then number 3 is the horizon that says, look, we're going to do a radical innovation, change the nature of the industry and lift the vision, lift the gaze. All right, so what does home-based post-operative care system look like? This is a picture of the sort of house my grandfather grew up in. 1 room, dirt floor, 2 levels, fireplace in the middle, no chimney, cow at the bottom end, 8 kids in the top, right? So, but what is home? Home's home. What does a home-based post-operative care system look like? And what we're talking about here is when you're in the hospital and you're doing stuff, we collectively take for granted the environment within which we deliver care. We control it. At home, guess what? We don't. And our system of care interacts with the environment. And there's some fabulous work by a guy called Fred Emery from 1963. What's the preferred strategy when the environment is tumultuous, the players are big, the stakes are high? Cooperate, collaborate, communicate. Cooperate, collaborate, communicate. And that's what we're talking about. The home replaces the ward, the care system includes the home, the patient interacts with the care system and the home. And that's the big change. So what we create is a complex adaptive system where the elements interact with each other and the interactions contain the seeds of emergent properties of the system. They're not intrinsically knowable. The system will create its own patterns to create its own stability, and we're going to play games. We're going to test that out because we're going to try to see, well, why would we send somebody home early from hospital? And what does it look like? Well, we've got players. Who are they? Who are the participants? What are the elements of a service that we would provide? You know, we might change the sheets occasionally. We're going to have to manage information, and that's the big clue. What type of information? Who's going to collect it? Who's going to use it? How do we manage risk? How do we anticipate it? I'm going to come back to that word. And how do we respond to instability? So, to play games like this, we've got archetypes of patients, and you can start to fill out what the archetypes are. We've got types of interventions. You can codify it using this Dave Snowden Kinefin framework. It's either simple or complicated in the acute setting, simple or complicated in the home care setting, but when it comes to interacting with the environments, we create complexity with emergent behaviours. And how do we anticipate and plan for that? This is some work which looks at patterns. And if you imagine a sheet of paper, it's got 4 dots on it. How many connections can you draw between 4 dots? And you go, well, you're an idiot. Of course, it's obvious it's 6. Great. What's the possible number of patterns of dots and connections? And you can try it and you can work it out, but I can tell you it's 2 to the power 6, 64. But if we had 10 dots and we were looking at the number of connections, and there's a generic form of the formula there for you, there's 45 connections. 2 to the power 45 is 35 trillion. So you can go from 64 to 35 trillion when you go from 4 players to 10 players. And you think about the number of people involved and agents involved in care of a person on a journey through a system, all of a sudden you're dealing with unfathomable complexity. To manage that, you have to constrain. There's a spelling mistake. We need to constrain the number of possible choices. We manage complexity initially by trying to reduce the choices. So we want a model of care that's simple on the other side of complexity. Okay, so the systems. We're going to have care bundles. We heard that a bit before. We're going to base models of care on defining features. I had a line under there, not around individual practitioners, but I took that out. And we're going to collect data that matters, and we're going to monitor. And how are we going to collect the data, and what sort of data? Is it, bio stuff from your Apple Watch? Is it probes on you that are automatically? Or are we going to poke the patient and say, are you okay? And if you're not okay, what are we going to do about it? So we don't wait for stuff, we poke them, we ask them. We have a system for monitoring. And we think about the components of the care, and you're experts at that. So what has to happen? We have to collect and anticipate, we have to risk stratify, we have to be bound by safety, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, first physiology, safety, belonging, self-esteem, self-actualisation. Home care teams. I think the clue is in, if I go looking for models of care that I am attracted to, I think of something, I thought, gee, that's smart. I wonder who's doing it. And I've learnt to look either in New Zealand or the Netherlands. Every time I have a genius idea, someone in the Netherlands is already doing it. Something about the Dutch. So they've got this idea of geographically based teams, promoting self-management, going back to generalist skills and not managing their frontline teams, coaching them. The teams can self-manage, they're smart, they can sort it out. And they can drop their overheads. Buurtzorg ripped apart the existing community nursing model by cutting their overhead costs from 21% to 8%. That means you can spend money on good people at the front line. Think about it. Get rid of the clipboard soldiers. Small back office functions. So we're going to transform the system. And that, this stuff's everywhere, but it's a how do we get there? So one of the concepts that I like is this concept of anticipatory models of care based on the work of a philosopher called Robert Rosen. It basically says that you've got a model that represents reality, and there's an interaction between the way you cross-check in the present from the situation that you're in with the model, and you adjust. But you're not adjusting because things are going on wrong. You're adjusting so that you're always on course, like a sailing ship, to achieve your objective. We adjust in the present, informed by the future. Adjust in the present, informed by the future, by reference to a model. And we adjust forwards, not backwards. And I think that'll have implications for how we manage the environment and how the service interacts with the environment. Because remember, the environment's the bit we can't control. If we want to control the environment, you plonk them in the middle of a hospital, you stick them in a ward. And then you ask, well, what information do we collect and how do we manage the information? So the argument here is that successful models start with the end in mind, use the tools, methods and models, including pathways and protocols to achieve it. And I thought, well, how has post-op care changed in your professional lifetime? I could ask you, if you went back 20 years, could you have anticipated being where we are now? And sitting here now, have you got clear in your mind what it's going to look like in 20 years' time? Because if you have, come up here and tell us about it. Because I haven't got a clue what it's going to look like. I gave a talk about the future to some school kids and said, well, here's what the future looked like in 1972 when I left school. I said, here's banking. It was a bank book. We had a cyclone that hit Darwin. The rest of us found out about it a day later, 24 hours later. They said, hello, we've lost radio contact with Darwin. Something might have happened. How does it change in the future? That's the big question. Here's the argument. We shape our tools. Thereafter, our tools shape us. Basically, all innovation rides on the back of technology, and most of our technological change in the present era is the novel combination of existing technologies plus miniaturisation. Novel combination of existing technologies plus miniaturisation. And we're going to go quick look through the digital camera. Right? Philippe Kahn, French guy, really interesting guy. He wanted to create a 21st century version of a Polaroid picture. So he wanted to send his parents-in-law a picture of his new baby son, daughter, Sophie. And he attributes his inspiration to Debussy. And how the hell you join that up, I don't know, but that's what he said. And there's the apparatus over there. He's got his digital camera, he's got his flip phone, he's got his laptop, wrote a few lines of code, modem that makes weird noises. But how did he do that? What was the origin of that? Well, this guy invented the digital camera when he was at Kodak. And the people said, well, that's great, Steve. Why'd you do that? He said, so people can look at their photo album on TV. He goes, you idiot, no one's going to want to look at their photo album on TV. And that's him getting a prize from the president some years later. But before that was this guy. And he worked for a company that was he wanted to take pictures of the moon as the spaceship went past the moon. But first he took a picture of his son, Seymour. His big regret, he's the guy that made pixels square. Pixels are square because of him and that picture. He says, in retrospect, they'd have been better round, but it was too late. I met a guy called Hugh Doubley, and I had lunch with him, and he said, I'd like you to meet Raj. Raj was with me when I was at Apple. Raj put the digital camera in the iPhone, the novel combination of existing technologies plus miniaturisation. Anyone know what those two pictures are of? The Pope coming out to meet people in St Peter's Square, 2005, 2013. Anyone pick the difference? Right? Anyone in the room not got a digital one of these stupid phones? No, we've all got them. Yep. If you were a caveman, woman in the jungle, in the forest, a tree's a tree. But if you've invented an axe, a tree is an opportunity. You can't uninvent the possibility of that interaction. Having invented the iPhone, the digital camera, you can't uninvent your relationship with the universe, which is mediated through this thing. What happens to you if you leave it at home? You become anxious. You get distressed. Yeah? That's how dependent you are on your tools. All right, so we're in the middle of a revolution. We're redesigning our services in combination with tech. We've got to capitalise on the ITC revolution and look for the range of possibilities and ask ourselves what will drive it. Anyone noticed that picture before? Okay, story time. I had an arthroscopy in 1967. I was in hospital for a week. I wasn't allowed to do rehab for a month. Monash Watch, keeping an eye on our most vulnerable patients at home. We use probe, sense, respond. It's the troublesome 2% that generate 25% of our costs. What do? We ring them up and ask them if they're okay. We use a telecare guide, cost us $20 an hour. If they're not okay, we hand off to the coach. The coach intervenes and they're allowed to do whatever it takes. Why? We eschew the medical paradigm. We recognise the importance of the environment. We listen. Indigenous word, dadiri, deep listening and quiet contemplation. Big question is, why does change occur? I've talked about that. We need to create a new language. We've talked about the environments. How do we get from the present to the future? We address our fears, concerns, hopes and aspirations and look at what's limiting our thinking. What paradigms limit our thinking now? Ask ourselves, what can we change? How or what are we willing to change? What does the ideal future state look like, free of constraints? And what has to change in terms of our thinking and our mindsets if we're to change what we do now? A new approach is needed. We have to see things differently. And our management system has to be an anticipatory one. We have to think beyond the medical and we have to address resilience and vulnerability. I think that's the clue. And the team members work to maintain the trajectory and anticipate need rather than react. The moonshot starts with the end in mind, plans and adapts, ensures that we use the tools and thinking appropriate to context and circumstance. We focus on communication, we customise and we keep the patient safe and their carers. Yes, we can. And it's built around the clusters with defined care requirements. We move away from the old and we look at the team getting the patient safely back home. So, how we do this is the challenge. Anyone know what that picture is? Yeah. Craziest guy imaginable decides to launch a car into space. Anyway, the moonshot's a good start. It begins with a different way of thinking, but the really important clue is it's bound up in a new language. So we've got to create future models of care that represent desired ways of being and implement projects like you are doing to get us there. Thanks very much, Ross.
Top Med Talk. Nick Majerison here. Thanks for listening to Top Med Talk. Now, before we let you go, it's important that we remind you to subscribe to Top Med Talk. That way you'll never, ever miss another episode. Also, if we could encourage you to join us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, pretty much every single social media platform, we're there. Join us. And finally, check out topmedtalk.com. If you go to our website, you can subscribe to email updates. That way we can always tell you where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, and how you can join us. topmedtalk.com and click on the section marked email updates. Finally, Top Med Talk is proud to act as the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about them as well. ebpom.org is their website. That's ebpom.org. And if you go to ebpom.org/meetings, you can find out about some of the wonderful meetings that we attend and cover across the year here on Top Med Talk. That's ebpom.org/meetings.